Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read-along podcast. I, of course, am Tylor, who sounds like I am talking in a perfectly neutral tone of voice because I just spent a week learning how to record videos better. Boy, was that work trip not fun. And I am joined by Greg, who probably did something worthwhile with his time this week. I hope my bosses aren't listening to this podcast. Greg, how's it going?
I did my job this week, and my job is always worthwhile. Wink. Hi, bosses, in case my bosses are listening. No, I love my job. Tylor, some things happened this week, I guess. We're moving along through this book, and I believe this week takes us to the edge of the last 100 pages, in my edition at least. So
yeah, we're
not long
weeks
for
away
this.
from finishing. It's
Woof.
time to get into this. I will say, one chapter means that this could either be a very quick week or a really in-detailed discussion, and I have no idea which it will be. Luckily, I do have the ability to pad our length just a little bit. Today, we'll be talking about Chapter 24, A Time for Iron, and before we do, we can have an ill-advised discussion of visual media on a non-visual podcast, and I keep saying that faster and not messing it up. We need a longer name for this segment. Greg, we are discussing the cover of Book 8. This is the original cover. Don't put in ebook. Don't put in anything else. This is the cover. This has a special place in my heart. This was the cover that I originally saw at a book fair and was like, hey, that looks cool. I'll buy that. I was like 12. I liked the flags. This cover depicts a man, presumably Rand, holding out a sword. He is followed by a number of people on horseback. Some of them are holding flags, which are, for once in this series, accurately depicted. It is the dragon flag and the flag of the ancient Aes Sedai symbol. And if you have the wraparound cover, on the back cover, there is a large statue of someone with a crown of swords. It's worth noting this statue actually appeared, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago in our reading, but it felt really appropriate to do this in the big battle week with Rand kind of leading the armies into the war. So what are your thoughts on this cover, which is very different from the 2 other covers we've seen, if for no reason other than it focuses on men on horseback instead of women doing magic?
It's kind of an unusual one. I mean, I can certainly understand that it sparked your imagination as a kid, but even with all you described, what's striking to me is how small the men and especially the army appear. That you know, if I were to pick this up, of course, I'm looking at a version without the text on it, which you have to save room for the title and so on. But the kind of background dominates a big cloudscape that is on the front and back. I would say dark, stormy skies on the front, kind of sun breaking those clouds on the back. And again, it lines up to where you'd expect the full copy to be for the text. But the army in particular, if I looked at this quick at a bookstore, I would see the 3 men on horses and the statue, very Planet of the Apes. But I don't know that I would necessarily clock the massed legions behind them.
Yeah, this is an interesting choice, and it's one that I'm not sure how deliberate it is, because I could see 2 readings of this cover, right? One is that, we just don't have the budget for a giant army. I'm sorry, this isn't the Lord of the Rings. We'll draw the couple of figures and kind of imply the rest of them are, coming around the corner or something, right? But I agree with you. It looks like a small group riding to adventure, not an army riding to war. The alternative is they are coming out of a gateway, and so we're only seeing a few of them because only a few of them have arrived, but boy, do I wish we saw the gateway if that's what this was. So I'm kind of with you. It's a fine cover as things go, but it doesn't really give you a sense of the moment that it's actually depicting, right? We now know, having read this week, that this is not the happiest let's go to battle and win a war kind of scene, and there's kind of no indication of that tone on this cover, which is maybe my biggest complaint about it.
Well, and I also want to just throw a shout to the landscape, because I found myself thinking about that during this chapter, not to spoil the conversation too much, but, I think they refer to olive trees, and my mind kind of went to kind of Greece and Greek, which I would say this could be kind of a Greek island type. It's got some scrub to it and is mostly sandy, but aren't we further west than the Greek countries? We're more towards the Italy countries.
Well, so this is the interesting thing. I think if we line this up, it is Tyr is Italy, Ilion is Greece, and then Ibu Dar is the next country over, which is clearly also Mediterranean inspired, but not directly by either of those two countries. So this feels like the borderland between like Greece and, the Turkey kind of Caucasus, not quite Caucasus, further south than that, but right, that kind of Eastern European section of the Mediterranean Sea.
Wait, but aren't you're going east when you want to go west, right? Isn't Ebu Dar more like the Spain or the Portugal?
What you are assuming is that these things are lined up in the same order that they are in the real world.
Okay.
In this version of the map, Italy lies east of Greece, which is not how it is in the real world.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So but I think we're both saying the same thing, which is essentially like kind of looks Mediterranean. The craggy rocks you see certainly don't look, Northern European.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, and I think that it's a really good cover. It is one of the best of the original covers, if for no reason other than, as you're saying, it gets the geography right, it gets the statue right, it gets the flags right. Like, that's all I kind of need for this to be a pretty solid cover. My one complaint, now that we have read this chapter, and I'm not spoiling anything, please finish the chapter if you haven't, I'm really mad this sword isn't crystal. Like, come on. Give me Kalendor on a cover, please. But that's really my only complaint.
Fair and totally fun. And again, I think these are the series of these covers I always think van art. This would be a pretty boring van, but it still kind of fits. It's of that vintage.
Yeah, exactly. It looks like the book in the middle of the trilogy where you'd obviously have your van painted with the first or last. Come on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it is then time for us to dive into Chapter 24, A Time for Iron. And in order to avoid me just summarizing for the first half of this episode, we're going to do this POV by POV. We begin a dozen leagues from Ibu Dar, where a Raken lands and runs awkwardly to deliver a message. The army features a number of the locals from the area, as well as Torm and about 20 Damane. Kenner Mirage studies a map of lost camps and a mass retreat, and he wonders how this many soldiers were able to surprise his troops, and he thinks that the enemy will need time to regroup, so he at least has time to prepare. At this point, Suroth unexpectedly arrives with the Deathwatch guard and a personal Damane. Kennar sees the messenger turned away by Suroth's guards and wonders how dangerous it is to not receive that message, and then he recognizes one of the Damane as a former Aes Sedai, and she is referred to as Liandrin. Suroth...
I know her! I know her! Sorry,
Thanks
I
for that,
was just
Greg.
doing the Will Ferrell gif. Go ahead.
I love it. Suroth asks if he is ready to march, and he replies that they have at least a week, but Suroth says that the enemies are using channeling to travel, and Kennar wonders how she knows this. Kennar wonders if the folk here know about the original prophecy of the dragon, where according to him, Rand must bow to the Empress before the last battle, and then he asks Suroth if he can use the Damane, and Suroth agrees, but says he must wipe out the Asha'man, and anything less than a complete victory is unacceptable. So this is another introduction to the Seanchan military. We got one in the previous chapter. This is a new character, but kind of the same dynamic. What do we think of this kind of glimpse at the other side?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mirage is a great new character, and he's going to last a really long time. Yeah. People will have read the whole chapter.
Yeah, everyone's read the whole chapter. Dude dies at the end of the chapter. I remembered the name of the guy who sees his dead body. That's a good sign.
So I would say the two pieces of this that feel most important are Liandrin, she of the mighty cheekbones, R.I.P. Wheel of Time, the television show. Man, if they really go animated, I hope they preserve her look. 'Cause
seriously,
iconic. I hope that actress is getting work because she was awesome. And then the second one seems to matter that the prophecy exists over on that side of the sea, only it has been adapted so that, yes, the Dragon Reborn will rise, but it will be in service of the Empress, which to me is an interesting. I mean, we know that this is a offshoot culture. It's not like a Joseph Campbell, like these myths arose everywhere independently. It's a culture that broke off, but the way in which, the propaganda of the Seanchan army means that it's all in service of the Empress was interesting to me because I don't think we've seen that, right? Everyone else has the prophecy and maybe different pieces of it, but seems to still think that the Dragon Reborn will overcome darkness and rule the world.
And I have nothing else to say about this scrap of prophecy other than what I'm about to say, so let's just do it now instead of waiting until we get there. I think the interesting thing here is the question of how has this been preserved and how much do we trust the version of the prophecy that we know? Because you say everyone here kind of has the same version of the prophecy, that's likely because it's been kept by the Aes Sedai, right? They live much longer than the average person, they have libraries, they kind of can trace history all the way back to the breaking, and so the question that I'm kind of left with is you're right to use the word propaganda, but I'm not entirely convinced that it's Shan-Chan propaganda being more likely than Aes Sedai propaganda. And I am a little questioning whether or not Rand does need to bow to the Empress, right? I think I'm a little less likely to say it's just the Shan-Chan making something up than you are.
Well, but the Aiel also had Dragon
That's true.
Reborn prophecies. So I think I didn't necessarily make a leap that like this culture also has them and it's kind of warped by the culture there, and that has a negative connotation I do not intend. But but I take the point, which is, you know, we shouldn't just assume this is like a whole society with books and learning. Where are they getting their information? Where is this there? And I'll take that question that you asked and say nothing meaningful in response to it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you're pointing out the Aiel is a really good point, and also the Sea Folk would be a good example of this, right? They have the Koromor prophecy. But it's worth noting the prophecy that the Aiel have and the prophecy that the Sea Folk have are different than the prophecies that the Aes Sedai do. It's not that we have three overlapping prophecies, it's that we have three completely separate sets of prophecy.
That's more the Joseph Campbell version of mythology.
And so what's really interesting about the Shan-Chan is it's identical except one detail. And so it's unclear if that detail was lost from one version or added by the other. And that's kind of the question that I'm picking at a little bit.
And I guess it would be interesting if this is raised as like, haha, how silly are they? They think he's going to bow to their empress, and then that ends up being real. That would be a fun twist on this and would fit with your previous statements that Robert Jordan thought, what if being the chosen one stunk? And that would be one way to make it stink.
That would be one way to make it terrible. I want to talk about Suroth next, because she is a character who has been in this series since book 2, and it is very easy to forget about her because she wasn't in books 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? So it's been a little while with Suroth. So Suroth, as a reminder, she led the return of the Shan-Chan. She was the leader at Falm, and she was kind of forced back and regrouped and now has led this second group. I want to call it an invasion. She would call it a return. It's worth noting, Suroth, we know, but obviously Mirage does not, is a dark friend. And so when we hear that she has specific information about Rand's armies, when we hear that she knows that they are traveling and the rest of the army doesn't, Mirage wonders, how does she know this? And my response is, ooh, who's the dark friend spy among Rand's troops? Because it feels like this is something that she doesn't know through Shan-Chan sources, is probably something she knows through dark friend sources.
Yeah, I think dark friend sources, I mean, I guess when I read it, I was like, well, she might just have scouts on a hill that reported to her and not there. But I think what you're describing is more likely. Was on the television show, as I recall,
Correct.
Right? And kind of maybe was focused on a little bit more than in the second book, or, you know, gained prominence in my mind anyway, if that was
she
there.
had a cool-ass look, so it's very easy for her to gain prominence from that season.
Yeah, and so it is. I also kind of primarily read this as the military doesn't know, but anybody connected to the power. I mean, obviously, this is a slightly different version than an Aes Sedai, but it's like, you know, it kind of felt like magic folk know, plain folk don't know. Very much Grand Admiral Thrawn from Star Wars, right? Like, so this is the magic people know what's going on and can sense it. And I mean, I do like that moment where she's like, they're coming and they have to do this, so get ready. Like, it is kind of a fun setup for the conflict to come.
Absolutely. I have one more note in this POV, and it's something you already mentioned, but I want to kind of re-emphasize. Liandrin is captive. That's the big moment. It's the big reveal. But Liandrin being a captive of Suroth's actually diffuses a bomb that I was kind of hoping would go off. Because The one interesting thing that we've had with the Shan-Chan is that they don't quite know what to make of Aes Sedai, right? They think they are evil, they should be caged, but they don't, at least yet, really understand the three oaths, right? They seemed confused the one time they had an Aes Sedai and she couldn't lie in any way. And so Liandrin, as a member of the Black Aja, would have been a fascinating study for them, and if she was broken, could have given them some really valuable information, but she's being held by a dark friend who will not push Liandrin to reveal all of those secrets.
And you're reminding me, just to put a pin in, yes, she was a Black Aja. Yes, she was evil, but she was not a dark friend. She was not presumably in on all. Sorry, dark. Forsaken,
Yes,
Forsaken, and was not part of that network of communication and so on. So just to put her at the right level, I hear what you're saying, that, oh, that could have been really bad for everybody on this continent, but now she can just say anything and get out of it. Can you just remind us, where did we last see Liandrin? Like, was she at Falm?
So she was actually in Ibu Dar in the past books. So when the Shan-Chan invaded, that was right after Elaine and Nynaeve had raided the storehouse and gotten the Angreal and the Bowl of the Winds. The Black Aja that they had kind of been chasing were also in the city, and they had a conflict there. We didn't know what happened to any of them other than the one that was captured by Elaine and Nynaeve. Apparently, at least some of them were made demonic.
Cool.
Next POV is one that we know well. Rand rides through a gateway. He holds tight to the power as Lews Therin says the past 6 days have been enough death for anyone, and he is shocked that it has only been 6 days. The women who quote-unquote saved him in the last battle are keeping extremely close, and Rand wonders if they're looking for an opportunity to actually kill him, where before they didn't quite have the chance. All of the nobles who are with him assemble, and Rand says that there are 50,000 soldiers headed their way, and warns them to stick to the plan. Lews Therin declares that there is something wrong, but Rand ignores him. Rand then orders the soldiers to line up, and he thinks that he can only trust Bashir and possibly Gregorin, and so he keeps all of the other potential allies among those with him in separate groups so that they can't band together against Rand. Rand, at this point, says that there is something wrong with saidin here. Dashiva approaches and tells Rand that there is something wrong with saidin here, and Rand at first insists that Dashiva is possibly suffering from madness, but Dashiva is shocked that Rand hasn't noticed and tells him to check. Rand then touches the source and does notice exactly the same thing. Rand says it doesn't change anything, and when the scouts arrive reporting that the Shan-Chan have many Damane and are approaching, Lews Therin says madness creeps up on some, and then Rand prepares for battle.
This is probably the fragment I have the least to say about.
Correct.
It just kind of all matches what we already knew. I guess I clocked that it sounds like the power is getting worse, whether that's they're traveling towards something that is the disruption or the taint. They're traveling towards the taint, or it's deteriorating everywhere. Kind of question mark, but I think it's the former, not the latter. And I just noted, 5 big columns. It's still a pretty big army despite all the losses we've had described.
Yeah, and I think for me, the only real notes I had here very much line up with what you're saying. My first is Rand and his strategy as the army is kind of shrinking and shrinking over time feels a little bit like the kind of casual definition of insanity that we've all heard at one point or another, right? It's doing the exact same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And this is the challenging part of this section of the chapter for me, is I'm simultaneously saying Rand seems like he has lost it in a way that we maybe haven't seen at any point prior to this. And all of that is complicated by the fact that his relationship with the power is operating in this like unpredictable, dangerous way in a way that doesn't seem to be related to madness or his mental state. And so it's kind of one of those challenging things where you know that something is wrong and you have 2 really good candidates, and I can't piece together how much of it is one versus the other. So what are your thoughts on those kind of 2 reasons why Rand seems kind of so off in this chapter?
I think I leaned into he's going mad, and it's the renewed presence of Lews Therin, and that his actions seem a little more erratic. And again, we're not too worried about spoiling the chapter. So especially in a little while where everybody's like, well, we did it. That's good enough. And he's like, no, keep going. And
Yeah.
I think that kind of, he's got bloodlust, which I kind of interpret as kind of natural aggressive feelings hitting an unwell, unstable identity. So I think it's more Rand than the power, but and especially I still think my half-formed theory is that something about that island with the giant statue is disrupting this, and so as we kind of keep traveling southwest and get closer to that island, that's why the power's getting worse. But I don't think the power is affecting Rand. I think Rand just notices it when he touches it.
Sure. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. The only other note that I have here is that it's Dashiva who is the one who is really calling out the challenge with the power. And Dashiva has been described by Rand as the most powerful of the Asha'man, but also the one who kind of is the quietest and the least likely to seem to get involved. Rand has described him as spacey in a lot of situations. And so it strikes me that the Asha'man, who is the strongest in the power, but also the least likely to be confrontational, chooses this moment to be like, stop, think about this. This feels really dangerous to me. So I don't know whether you've kind of clocked Dashiva as separate from any of the other Asha'man, and no fault on you if you haven't. It's your first time reading the series with 1,000 characters. But what are your thoughts on kind of some of these Asha'man who have known Rand for a little while, seemingly being willing to step up and talk to him and tell him what the flaws are in a way we maybe haven't seen yet?
I mean, I think where I filed Dashiva, and I don't know how accurate this is like, it felt like the bad Asha'man, Taim, right?
Yeah, Taim is the leader, yeah.
Yeah, that he was pulling Dashiva into his orbit, and then Rand yanked Dashiva away and said, I'll take this guy. And so I read Dashiva more as trusted, advisor. I'm not suspicious of him, which I think is what you're asking without asking. So I kind of feel like he's been pulled into Rand's orbit by Rand, and I think it's, as a literary device, it's like, let's just make sure it's clear he has somebody to bounce off of, right? It's the Holmes and Watson, right?
Yeah.
We were bouncing off this guy so we can see how less stable Rand is becoming over time.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And in particular, given that Dashiva was kind of introduced to us as is his spaciness actually just his personality, or is it the first signs of madness? Seeing him kind of come out of his shell a little bit and, as you say, give that advice to Rand, I think is kind of the reassurance we need that he's not the mad guy who's already too far gone. It feels like he's in a more stable place than Rand is at this point. We obviously have another check-in with Rand before the end of the chapter. Any last thoughts on this POV? I'm probably going to do the next couple in a row because they're very short.
Yeah, I think this is the part where my notes did not separate by POV, so it's like it all kind of merges together. So I think I'm good on this shard.
Excellent. Let's do 3 shards in a row then. Kenner Mirage hopes to have the element of surprise because he knows where the enemy is, but they don't necessarily know where he is. The Raken have apparently been grounded, and Mirage now has 20 Damane under his command. The scouts have spotted Rand's forces 5 miles away, and he knows that he has been seen by the way that Rand is arranging his forces, and he thinks that Rand will attempt to surround him, but he can survive. We then switch to Bertome's POV, who thinks that all of the other lords are idiots, especially Wiraman, and when another noble says that Rand intends for them all to die, he nervously watches Gedwyn, one of the Asha'man. He sees Gedwyn and Wiraman begin to argue, and Wiraman seemingly says that he needs Rand's orders to press something, but we don't find out exactly what they were debating. Gedwyn then tries to intimidate Bertome, but seems to get nowhere with this, and eventually a scout arrives, chased by a number of Seanchan's soldiers and a Damane, and the men charge. We then switch into Varric Varric's POV, who hears the sound of battle and rallying cries in the distance. He sees several riders headed in his direction, and he thinks that the Legion men and their guerrilla tactics are the worst of the enemies, and he doesn't see any of them but is still worried. He spots several dead Damane, and their lightnings have apparently hit their own army indiscriminately. One of the Suldam denies that this was possible, but when Mirage orders that they begin withdrawing, Mirage says that they will rely on the Suldam, and she seems terrified by this possibility.
So my full notes on this section are just like hugely chaotic battle. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't take a lot out of this other than Rand's alliances remain loose. Like these factions kind of don't trust each other. They're not coordinated between them. You know, I think there's a way in which it felt, and this goes to Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, it kind of felt like Rand would have like a battle meld ability to like pull everybody together and act like as one entity. And he doesn't. Like it's just kind of more chaotic.
Yeah. I basically had one note on each of these POVs. So
sure.
My note from the Kenner Mirage perspective is basically it feels like Rand has taken a leap forward tactically compared to this seemingly very experienced leader. Like I think the previous POV was very much establishing that Mirage is like a general who really knows what he's doing, and he is just woefully unprepared to deal with battle against someone who can use traveling and who has Asha'man. And I think that is something I wouldn't have expected from the previous couple chapters. Like Rand is suffering serious losses, but he's doing it while seemingly outnumbered 10-1, and that's still kind of impressive.
I take that lesson, and again, we're seeing, you know, thinking about like a video game, Rand is leveling up that skill by just simply, you know, I feel like it's all been kind of a blur since he started this campaign, but it's like, have there been like 9-10 battles? So it's like he's, like you're saying, he's honing his tactics, he's leveling up that skill. It kind of all makes sense.
This actually reminds me of something. I remember when the Ukraine war started, somehow like 4 years ago now.
Oof, yeah.
There were a number of articles about how Russia has this habit of like losing wars for 2 years and then eventually learning from it and turning things around. Like the conflict in Syria, Russia basically lost for 3 years straight and then figured out drone warfare and suddenly won that conflict. And that feels very much like what is happening to Rand here. He is just throwing troops at the wall and figuring out what works and what doesn't. And by the end of this, apparently 6 days, it feels like he's really taken a leap forward. Any last thoughts on this POV?
No.
Basically, the Bertome POV says exactly what you said. Rand's theoretical allies are scattered, they're stupid, they are not coordinating, everything seems to be kind of falling apart within the lines, even as the Asha'man are winning the battle. And the really interesting part of this that we don't fully get filled in is Wiraman, who is one of the High Lords of Tyr, who Rand has literally sent away like 3 times because he doesn't trust him, is getting in an argument with one of Rand's loyal Asha'man, and Wiraman is saying, I won't do it without Rand's orders. And that both surprises me that the nobles are seemingly sticking with Rand when he's throwing them through the meat grinder, and it worries me a little bit that one of Rand's Asha'man seems to be pushing Wiraman to do something outside of Rand's commands.
Yeah, so I don't mean to metagame your question. So it sounds like, you know, I had not been clocking a lot about like what's going on with the Asha'man, but it seems like you're saying like maybe pay a little more attention to what's going on with the Asha'man.
At least this one, right? Like Tashiva, I think you even convinced me like that dude's just helping Rand, but this worries me.
Yeah. And, you know, Wiraman has fallen into the category of one of those names I recognize every time. Like, oh, we've talked about him before, but he doesn't feel like a full person in so many ways.
Actually, hold up 1 second. I just rechecked my notes. The Asha'man who is arguing is Gedwyn, who is more loyal to Taim than to Rand. So we should be keeping an eye out for the Asha'man, but maybe not Rand's loyal Asha'man.
Sounds good. So keep an eye on Gedwyn. I'll never remember that, and it sounds too much like Gawain, so it's not going to be a thing. But
his first name is Charl, if that's helpful. I can never forget Charl.
Charl.
Final POV is Varric, This feels like it is basically like the battle is chaotic and it is not going well for the Shan-Chan. But the one fascinating piece of information here is that it is not just Saidin that is having problems. It seems like Saidar is also malfunctioning or doing what it's doing. It seems like some of the Damane here struck their army instead of an enemy army. And that's seemingly unprecedented, but it tells us that whatever is going on with Rand and the Asha'man is not just about the Dark One's taint, because the women, I know,
Oh, I wish we did episode titles. Go ahead.
because the female side of the power is not in any way tainted, right? So what are we making of the fact that this seems to be at least symmetrical, the effect that's going on with the power?
Your wording confused me before that, and it was me getting distracted. So both sides of the black and white cookie are being tainted. You were saying the
Be
hypothetical.
very careful with the word taint, because
Okay.
the taint is a specific thing that affects the male side of the power ever since Luce Theron
Right.
pushed away the Dark One.
So
what I am saying is this is not that, because it is affecting women.
I see. And so something is disrupting the frequency on all of the power. Okay.
Correct.
Now I think I got your wording straight. Got it.
Excellent. I have no more thoughts about this POV. Battle is chaotic. Let's summarize the rest of the chapter. Bashir worries that the South has made him soft as he is cold on what is basically a summer day in the North. The nobles debate if they've had enough or if they want to get it over with, as there is a copse of trees nearby where they know there are a large number of Shan-Chan and they can't decide whether to surround it or charge straight in. Bashir asks Roshade if he can count on him to not delay again, and Roshade says that they are almost done. Bashir thinks that half of his forces are dead and it is worse for the enemy. Bashir orders triple the scouts to go out and to avoid places where a Damane could hide. At this point, we switch into Rand's POV, who settles his horse. Adley apologizes, saying it was an accident, and he apparently let a shield protecting soldiers slip. Rand worries that other Asha'man will also begin to slip. The women who have been following him around demand that Rand be satisfied with his victory, but Rand says he wants to drive the Shan-Chan into the sea. At this point, Bashir arrives, saying that they have won the battle and it is time to stop, and he has ordered the other lords to rally to Rand. Bashir says that the remaining Shan-Chan are hiding in the forest and will eventually flee. Rand says that he can kill them all and hit them from all sides, but Bashir insists that he isn't thinking straight, and then Rand reveals the bundle that he's been carrying throughout the battle, and it is Kalendor. He channels through it, feeling a new sensation unlike what he has felt before, and he describes it as a cracking web. He wields an inhuman amount of the power, and the nearby hills are engulfed in flames and lightning. He eventually falls to the ground and then is struck by something, and he realizes that it is Bashir, who tells him that Rand is striking his own army in addition to the Shan-Chan. Rand looks and sees lightnings falling around his allies, and then he releases the source and begins seeing double. Flynn, one of his Aes Sedai, looks down and sees Adley, one of the non-allied Aes Sedai, or Asha'man, dead. Rand thinks that he has lost, and Luce Theron says that no one can defeat him. Finally, we switch into Yulan's perspective, who sees a dead Mirage and thinks that the Shan-Chan are lost. So, big stuff happens here. What do we take out of it?
So I guess my first question is, I was trying to remember the prophecy fragments. We got that he would take Kalendor and then he would drive it into the stone, or was that not part of the prophecy?
Yes. So, the prophecy is that Rand would take Kalendor, that would announce that he is the Dragon Reborn, and then there was a separate interesting prophecy that was something like, into the stone he drives his blade, something, 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 but then the follow-up was, who comes after shall follow true, or something along those lines. And we now know who that is. A few chapters ago, I'm actually going to have to look up in my notes exactly which one of the Asha'man it was, but one of the Asha'man brought Rand this package and said, like, man, you didn't tell me about all of the dangers that were around it. We now know that was Rand sending someone to get the blade and follow after to bring it to him, and according to prophecy, that Asha'man will stay true to him. And I will look that up while you
Yeah,
respond.
well, so I think at the time I guessed that that was like a seal because that is
Yeah.
what other people had brought. And so I certainly didn't think it was Kalendor. And I think even with what you are saying, I always kind of assumed Rand had to go pick it back up if that was a misunderstanding of those prophecies. But it's interesting that, if you've got the Excalibur type weapon, it seems like it has to end up in the hands of the hero for the primary action. So to me, while this is just exciting in its own regard, it also to me feels like a big step towards the kind of fulfillment of all the prophecies that
Yeah.
now we're headed into the end game, by which I mean 6 more books or something like that.
It was Narishma, so the one whose name I never remember because he's not one of the super important ones. So
Okay.
Narishma, according to prophecy, Rand's good
Staying
friend.
true.
Um, let's talk a little bit about Bashir, because he has a couple of really interesting moments here. One is he is the one who assesses the losses and the victories and say, we are done, we won. And given kind of the way that we were having the battle described up to this point, I wasn't really convinced that this would be a victory of any kind for Rand. But Bashir seems to think like now is the time for caution. They've lost. Get out of there. And in particular, I was kind of struck by how Bashir was pushing the Asha'man during this. He seems to be like, we need all of the lords to retreat. We need to fall back. We need to get out of here. But Roshade, he's like, you keep destroying anything you see in this forest. And I think that distinction, it feels like even Bashir is starting to like treat the Asha'man differently after this campaign. And I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, but it was interesting.
And I just want to make sure so the things we need to remember about Bashir before I answer that question, he's one of the 5 great general people, right? But is he related to Fail? No.
Yes, he is Fail's father.
That's what I thought. And then I quickly Googled, and that wasn't in the first line. And then I was like, I want to open this up and look at this description. And I was like, I probably don't want to see that. Yeah,
I know. Wheel of Time.
I know that's like my one job is not to know stuff.
One of the names that we have said on this podcast this week, if you Google it, it will show you another character's name and spoil the crap out of you. Do not Google the Wheel of Time.
I will remember my role on this, which is to ask Tylor instead of Googling. So it does seem, again, that it speaks to this idea of factions, right? That the factions are not cooperating correctly.
That's accurate, as he coughs, right?
Yeah,
this just feels like the coalition is falling apart in this scene.
And yet then the real threat becomes clear, which is you have an unstable guy with an insane amount of power that can just rain down fire and brimstone and kill everyone.
Yeah, and there's something simultaneously really exciting about seeing Rand just going, I'm just going to end this battle, and then the fact that it immediately turns into something worse than a Pyrrhic victory is really, I think, smart of Robert Jordan. Right? I think it's a really good way to turn something that feels kind of fun and exciting into ash a little bit. And honestly, as someone who lived through Vietnam, it feels like the exact right note to hit of like sometimes the planes come through and they bomb the hell out of the field and you still lost the battle.
Yeah. And it is striking to me as you describe that this is so against, in general, Rand's been worried about his losses, not from a purely military, but like actually like, I don't want the people who are loyal to me to suffer. And so the fact that he kind of lost control to this degree or gave into the tainted power to this degree, to me is another sign that we should be looking at Rand falling apart more than any other factor shaping this.
So Rand destroys part of his own army with the power. What percentage of this are we blaming on the weirdness of the power, and what percentage of it are we blaming on Rand is an insane person and sometimes he's just going to attack indiscriminately?
I would go 50-50 because we got the hint that the Damane were losing control and killing their own people, so it's part of the power. But I would say the other 50% is Rand should have been in control enough to see that happening and not needed. I found the strikes like very confusing when they happen. I'm like, wait, there's something hitting him? Something about the way it was presented really boggled my mind. I think I had to read it twice. And so I think Rand should have been able to sense that and figure that out faster, but it shows that he's fallen within that.
Well, and I think that that's actually the purpose of Adley at the beginning of this chapter, right? Is we see another instance of an Asha'man who seemingly has failed as a result not of madness, but of, losing a grip on the power. But when he did it, his weave just disappeared and didn't protect some people. And so I think the implication here is that perhaps Rand is fighting the same force as these other Asha'man, but he's so mentally unstable that when he loses control, it happens in a really terrible way instead of the kind of just fine way.
It's like when you and I are playing a board game and you lose control a little and you'll recover, but I lose control and I'm already half mad to begin with. So I'm going to end up swearing at somebody or tossing over the table.
Never once did I assume if one of us was going to be half mad in a metaphor that it would be you, but I appreciate that. That's very kind of you, Greg. I want to briefly talk about Calendor because it's kind of the piece here that is surprising. It's not what we expected, and its arrival goes the opposite of how I think we would have expected, right? This is the Excalibur, as you described it, the great sword, and the first thing it does is kills half of Rand's army.
See, but I mean, I just said 50-50. There's no other 50 for Calendor. That's not how percentages work. So I hear what you're saying, but I will say in the moment, I thought I didn't blame the sword. But you're right that this should be a crowning moment when Rand takes the greatest weapon and leads the army forward in a mighty charge, and instead he kills half the army that would have made said charge.
Yeah. If you have already been metagaming my comments, you don't need to read too much into this one, but read as much as you want to. We have another hint at something going on with the Asha'man, because Adley is killed by Rand's lightnings, and it's worth noting that Rand observes, is it Flynn, looking over at him, and he seems distraught by this. And so the fact that Rand kills one of his loyal Asha'man and it is noticed by other loyal Asha'man, don't Google, I see your keyboard working, that feels very important from kind of the perspective of this, where if at the beginning of the chapter we were like Rand's Asha'man are loyal and it seems like Gedwyn is maybe not, I'm a little worried that now some of Rand's Asha'man might be questioning it if Rand is accidentally killing some of them.
Well, and we have the shield incident in this fragment as well. No, what I was actually Googling is something else. I don't know if it's the other book I'm reading or something I was listening to. There was a really problematic Flynn. And I'm like, why am I what is, it wasn't this that brought Flynn to my mind. I'm like, what is the other problematic Flynn? And then I was like, is it Tron? I mean, Tron has Flynn, but I don't think it was. I haven't thought about Tron lately. I think it might be Dungeon Crawler Carl, but that's what I was Googling to try to find it. So I add the shield moment because that was telling that it's like, oh, a bunch of them have been dropping shields and it's presented casually like in the chaos of battle, some are doing this, but what if the chaos is actually very coordinated? Makes sense to me. So
I think that makes a lot of sense.
So based on your questions, just a fully metagame, I would say that the 100 pages left, if we come back to Rand, which you could get away from him, but I think we'll get more Rand. I think it's going to be him kind of revealing to us that he's been one step ahead of these Asha'man and is going to reveal whatever conspiracy they've attacked him with. That's just one free Greg random prediction for our listeners. You're welcome.
Just a moment of silence for how right and or wrong that prediction is. I think Greg usually bats 40%, so
sounds
good
right.
for baseball.
I'll take it. That's Hall of Fame numbers.
Else.
Yeah.
I think the only other note I have here is that both armies think they lost. And that feels accurate of the conflict as it's depicted here, but it's also kind of not a situation I'm very familiar with, right? Typically when I think of battles like this, the term I hear frequently is it's a Pyrrhic victory, right?
Yeah.
But at least someone thinks it's a victory, and that doesn't seem to be the case for either side.
War, huh? What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. And for those mega Greg fans, they will know that's the second time I've sung this song on a podcast this week. I don't think there is anybody who crosses over. No, but we were on my movie review podcast, just to plug it, we were talking about The Thin Red Line, the Malick film. Well, listen to the podcast. And I had never seen it, but we were talking about that movie recently, which is very much in the same spirit. It's like, hey, you won, but not really. Like, that's how war really is.
The description that I had read recently of the Vietnam War that I had never heard before is the U.S. lost the Vietnam War despite never losing a battle. And like that feels accurate of what is going on with Rand in this chapter.
Yeah.
Next week, we have 2 chapters, and at least the first one is not sticking with Rand. These are Chapter 25, An Unwelcome Return, and Chapter 26, The Extra Bit, which will actually get us to a POV that we haven't had in quite some time.
Ooh.
Greg, any thoughts or expectations about what we're going to be seeing next week?
I mean, I stepped on it earlier when you said there's only 3 more weeks, but I for whatever reason decided, I'm just going to write them all into my little notebook here. And an unwelcome return got me very intrigued. I'm like, okay, because, there are some returns that feel like I would like to see that all fell into welcome. So I'm very curious to see. Obviously the big one out there would be like Moraine, but I can't imagine a situation when like Moraine coming back would be unwelcome and so on. So I'm very curious, I suppose is really what that means. I have no specific predictions, but I think I will say we will come back to Rand again before the end of this book, whether my bigger theory is right or not. But it's exciting to be down to those 3 weeks and about 100 pages in my edition. So I hope everybody at home is excited. I hope everybody at home has bought book 9. Yes, Tyler, I did just look down at the cover yet again to confirm. Book 9 finishes out my box set, so I need to start shopping for the next box set. But I hope everybody will join us, even Tyler, next time through the glass columns.